What is up, Solo fam? My name is John Solo, and boy do I have a story for you. The Adventures of Pinocchio is a book you guys have been begging me to check out, basically since Messed Up Origins started. After reading it, I understand why. We've covered a lot of stories on this show, diverse stories from all over the world. But in my opinion, not a single one is even close to being as straight up weird as Pinocchio. It reminds me of a book that would be written by Tom Bombadil. Some of you might not be surprised to hear that, because honestly, Disney's Pinocchio is a pretty weird movie. Like, why does this cat wear clothes and walk on hind legs while Figaro is a normal kitten? Seems that we have another Goofy vs. Pluto situation on our hands. But on top of being weird as butts, it has an incredibly messed up ending, possibly the most depressing we've read. We're gonna get all into that book in just a second. First, I want to recap the Disney movie so it's fresh in your head. Don't forget that if you want to support the channel and series, to smash that like button. It's been a really long time since we've hit our goal of 5,000 likes, so if you guys can somehow manage to reach it by this weekend, I'm gonna do an extra episode of Messed Up Origins next week. My hopes are high. Don't let me down, Solo fam. I need this. The movie opens with an Italian woodcarver named Geppetto finishing up his new marionette and naming him Pinocchio. That night he wishes upon a star for the puppet to become a real boy, and the blue fairy grants his wish. The fairy tells Pinocchio that if he proves himself brave, truthful, and unselfish, he'll become a real human boy, and she assigns Jiminy Cricket to be his conscience. Geppetto is thrilled to find that Pinocchio's come to life, and the very next day sends him to school. Only Pinocchio gets distracted by a scumbag fox and cat who convince him to join Stromboli's puppet show for an easy path to fame and fortune. Even though he's a hit with the crowd, Pinocchio doesn't get any of the puppet show's revenue himself, and when he tries to go home, Stromboli locks him in a birdcage and their wagon takes off. The blue fairy comes to Pinocchio that night, and after making him and Jiminy promise to not make any more mistakes, she sets him free. Only he finds himself getting swindled once again into going to Pleasure Island with a group of misfit boys. It's on this island that young, stupid boys are encouraged to act on every impulse and desire they have. But after less than a day of degenerate behavior, the boys start transforming into donkeys and are sold to the salt mines as slaves. Pretty freaky. Pinocchio and Jiminy escape the island and learn that Geppetto was eaten alive by a giant whale named Monstro while searching for the missing puppet. Pinocchio takes on the responsibility of saving Geppetto himself, and despite the risk involved, he pulls it off successfully. Well, mostly successfully. He actually dies in the process, but because he acted so bravely and selflessly to save his father, the blue fairy brings him back to life as a real human boy, and that weird little family lives happily ever after. I'll be honest, Pinocchio always freaked me out as a kid. I hated Stromboli and the part where the kids turn into donkeys. Also, it's from 1940. I'm not the only one who finds something creepy about old movies, right? Anyways, if you thought that was crazy, remember that Disney has always toned down the harsher elements of these stories, including the character of Pinocchio himself. Carlo wrote The Adventures of Pinocchio to serve as a warning to children that always choosing to do what's easy and expedient and enjoyable will eventually get you into trouble, and that you're gonna have to work hard and suffer to reach your full potential. Because of that, we see Pinocchio make quite a few stupid decisions starting on the day he was first carved. The story starts with a wood craftsman named Antonio finding a block of pine wood that he's gonna turn into a leg for his table. Only as soon as he starts carving into it, the wood screams. Antonio is freaked out by the apparently magic wood and gives it to his poor neighbor Geppetto, who plans on starting a career as a puppeteer. He decides to use the wood to make his first puppet, Pinocchio, but right out of the gate, his behavior is downright rude, and a few other choice words I try not to use on this show. As soon as his nose is carved, it starts to grow longer the more he acts like a butthole to Geppetto. Right after his feet are carved, he kicks Geppetto in the shin, and immediately after learning how to walk, he runs out of the house and into town. When he gets into town, he runs into a police officer who assumes he's been mistreated by his father, because why else would he be running from him, and he arrests Geppetto. The most ridiculous part is Pinocchio doesn't even care. He brushes the incident off and goes back to his house, where he meets the character who inspired Jiminy Cricket, Rickety Cricket. Nah, he just meant a regular talking cricket. Unlike Jiminy Cricket, who set up camp in Geppetto's house the night Pinocchio was made, Talking Cricket says he's lived in the house for a century, and he warns Pinocchio that if he continues to misbehave, he'll have to suffer repercussions. Pinocchio didn't really feel like listening to the whole spiel though, so he decided to throw a hammer at the cricket, killing him. To be fair, it was an accident. He just wanted to throw the hammer near him. but still sad. A century of life ruined by one rude puppet. Pinocchio fixes himself a meal and falls asleep with his feet on the stove, which results in them burning off. When Geppetto is released that night, he agrees to make Pinocchio some new feet if he goes to school the next day. He sells his only jacket for enough money to buy Pinocchio a textbook, and the next morning, Pinocchio takes it with him on his way to school. Only just like in the movie, he's distracted by a puppet show and decides to sell his textbook for a ticket. So disrespectful. Apparently, the puppets in the show were carved from the same block of wood as Pinocchio because they recognize him from the crowd and call out to him during the show. This effectively ruins the show for the rest of the crowd, and the terrifying puppet master Mangiafuoco holds Pinocchio personally responsible. He decides he's going to use the puppet as firewood to cook his meal later that night. The puppet master is a pretty interesting character. Listen to the way he's described in the book. A large man so ugly he evoked fear by simply being looked at. He had a beard as black as a smudge of ink and so long that it fell from his chin down to the ground, enough so that when he walked, he stepped on it. His mouth was as wide as an oven. His eyes were like two red-tinted lanterns with the light turned on at the back. And in his hand, he sported a large whip made of snakes and foxtails knitted together. This is the book's rendition of what he looks like, and this is mine. I think they're equally hideous. Now, while Mangiafuoco is a terrifying human being, he's surprisingly compassionate. When Pinocchio breaks down in sadness, telling him about his poor father Geppetto waiting for him at home, the puppet master feels sympathy, and he gives Pinocchio 5 gold coins to give to his father and sets him free. It'd be nice to hear that Pinocchio went home after all this, apologized to Geppetto, and gave him the gold coins to buy them a nice dinner and a new coat. Unfortunately, that would have gone against the entire purpose of this book, which I'll say again, was to show children what happens when you pursue what's expedient and enjoyable over what's difficult and truly rewarding. It's pretty much the opposite of the Legend of Hercules, which we talked about a few weeks ago. He deliberately chose a severe and glorious life over a pleasant and easy life because he's the man. It's crazy that these stories were written over 10,000 years apart and have such a similar message. I mean, think about it. The Legend of Hercules was one of the most popular stories throughout the entirety of ancient Rome and Greece's existence. This might blow your mind, but the story of Pinocchio is the second most translated book ever published, right behind the Bible, and it's one of the best-selling books of all time. I think there's a reason we humans gravitate towards stories with this kind of message. I think somewhere in our subconscious ancient brain, we know this message to be a fundamental truth. Anyway, let's get back on track. On the way home, Pinocchio comes across a fox that's pretending to have a busted leg and a cat claiming to be deaf. Note that in the movie, the cat isn't deaf, but instead just doesn't talk. I like finding little changes like that. They tell Pinocchio that if he plants his 5 gold coins in a field outside the city of Catchfools, they'll sprout into gold coin trees. And see that bird in the upper left corner? He tries to warn Pinocchio that he's about to get played for a fool, but the cat eats him. Not a super important detail, but one I wanted you to know. Some of you might be wondering, how is Pinocchio eating up all this baloney? Is he that big of an Oscar Mayer fan? But you've got to remember, he's got the innocence of a child and a brain that's made of wood. So he wasn't born with the best baloney detector. I wish I had a literal baloney detector. I love baloney, and I hate looking for it at the store, because I always get lost. They offer to walk him to the city, and they con him into using one of his gold coins to pay for their expensive dinner at a nearby inn. They basically do that thing where when you're on a date, you have someone call you with a fake emergency just in case it's going terribly or the person's profile pictures were a little too flattering. Pinocchio falls asleep at the inn, and they duck out early, leaving behind a note saying there was an emergency and to meet them at the Field of Miracles the next morning. They go a ways ahead on the path and disguise themselves as bandits to try and rob Pinocchio of his last 4 coins when he walks by. They almost have him too, until Pinocchio bites off the cat's hand and makes a break for it for a nearby house where the fairy with turquoise hair lived. As you can probably guess, the fairy with the turquoise hair is what inspired the blue fairy in the movie. Pinocchio is banging on the door begging for help, but the fairy tells him that all of the house's inhabitants are dead, including herself, and she's waiting on her coffin. I don't know, I can't explain that one. Without her help, Pinocchio is is caught by the bandits, who tie his hands behind his back and proceed to hang him from a tree. Only this isn't the quick style hanging that breaks your neck when you fall. They strung him up and lifted him by his neck off the ground, which means he was forced to suffocate while the fox and cat watched. Until they got bored of watching, I guess. Apparently it takes a while for a magic puppet to suffocate, and the two just walked away when they got bored. Which means that Pinocchio spent his last few moments alone, reflecting on the bad decisions he made and the tomfoolery that led to his death. Originally, this is where the story ended. It was meant to show young people what'll happen if you refuse responsibility and just do whatever's immediately gratifying instead. Essentially sacrificing the great person that you could be for the underdeveloped mess that you currently are. But in 1833, readers weren't happy with this ending. They loved the rest of the book, but they wanted Pinocchio to have a full story arc where he redeems himself and becomes a good person, and I think that's reasonable. How much would any of us have liked the Emperor's New Groove if he died in the jungle with the Panthers and the movie was just over? So when the author's publisher reached out to him to ask about a possible expansion to the Adventures of Pinocchio, Carlo was like, sure, I'll just write another 15 chapters. And here we are, almost 200 years later, still talking about him. Now remember, while the fox and cat did string up Pinocchio in the tree, they left him alone after a while because they got bored watching him suffocate. And also, he didn't know it was the fox and cat because they were in disguise, so when he runs into them later and acts all buddy-buddy, that's why. He didn't know it was them. It ends up being the fairy with turquoise hair that saves Pinocchio's life, even though she just turned him away moments before. She looked out her window and saw him hanging lifelessly from a tree, so she sent a hawk to help him down and a stagecoach to bring him back to the house. She calls in 3 famous doctors to gauge the puppet's condition. The first 2, an owl and crow, couldn't give a definite answer, probably because they weren't real doctors. I bet you they were like chiropractors or something. The 3rd doctor was actually the ghost of the talking cricket that Pinocchio killed in the first few chapters. He said Pinocchio would be alright, but he's irresponsible and a terrible son. That's gotta sting, right? Even if your heart's made of wood? The fairy tries to give Pinocchio some medicine to speed along the healing process, but he refuses until 4 rabbit undertakers come to the house with a coffin to take his body away. This gets his attention. He drinks the medicine and pretty much instantly feels better, but now it's time to explain to the fairy how he got himself in such a predicament. He tells her everything that happened with the cat and fox leading up to the incident, but when she wants to know what happened to his gold coins, he starts to lie. This chapter is what served as inspiration for the nose-growing scene in the movie. According to the fairy, there's 2 types of lies, one that makes your legs grow shorter and another that makes your nose longer. Of course, Pinocchio's lies are the nose-growing kind, and soon enough he can't turn his head in either direction without knocking something over. At first, the fairy thinks it's kind of funny, because she's just trying to teach him a lesson. But he starts to get really upset, and after a few hours of listening to him cry, she summons 1,000 woodpeckers to peck his nose back to its normal size. The fairy seems to truly care about Pinocchio, so she makes him an offer. He and Geppetto can move in with her, and she'll help raise him as if he was her little brother. It turns out that Geppetto is already on his way over, and Pinocchio is super excited to see him and apologize for being such a crappy son. It looks like the puppet's finally trying to make some changes, but as Mike Tyson once said, change comes in time, so his morals are still a work in progress. He leaves the house to search for his father, and therefore hopefully see him a little sooner, but on his way he runs into the fox and cat. The cat is still missing his paw from when Pinocchio bit it off in self-defense, but for some reason the puppet can't put 2 and 2 together. It takes a lot of convincing, but the cat and fox once again persuade Pinocchio to come with them to the Field of Miracles and bury his gold coins, which they claim will then sprout gold coin trees. After the coins are buried, the group splits up, but when Pinocchio returns to the field 20 minutes later, he finds that he's been scammed and his coins have been stolen. He runs to the courthouse in the nearby city of Catchfools, which is populated by people who sacrifice their future well-being for immediate satisfaction. There's hairless dogs, featherless chickens, butterflies without wings. It's a rough sight. Carlo added a symbolic detail when describing the city, saying that every once in a while a beautiful stagecoach would pass through that was driven by either a fox, a hawk, or a vulture. These animals are all predators and scavengers and likely played a role in the downfall of the rest of the city's residents, just like the rich scumbags who populate our planet. When Pinocchio gets to the courthouse, he explains everything that happened with the fox and cat to a gorilla judge who has sympathy for the puppet, but even still chose to punish him for the crime of foolishness. After being in jail for 4 months, Pinocchio starts on his way back to the fairy's house, which he soon discovers is no longer there and was replaced by a gravestone. Pinocchio starts crying, and a nearby pigeon overhears this and offers to take him to the beach where Geppetto is currently building a raft to go look for him. When he's dropped off, he rushes washes to the coast and sees Geppetto far out in the distance. He tries to swim out to him, but the current keeps pushing him back, and then he sees a giant wave come crashing down on Geppetto's raft. He tries swimming out and saving Geppetto once again, but the old man's body is gone, so he ends up swimming to the nearby island of Busy. Everyone on this island spends their entire day working and doing chores, and it takes some time for Pinocchio to grasp this concept of working hard and earning something. He offers to help a woman bring her water jugs to her house in exchange for a drink, and soon he realizes that she's the fairy with turquoise hair, just somehow older. She makes a deal with Pinocchio that he can live with her and she'll act as his mother if he goes to school, and she hints that if he's good for an entire year, he'll become a real boy. There's a few hiccups along the way, including a fist fight, but Pinocchio works hard and manages to rise to the top of his class, and the fairy tells him that come tomorrow, he'll be a real boy. She also says they should throw a party to celebrate, and he goes out to invite all his friends from school. See, back in the day, you couldn't just make a Facebook event if you were having a party. You had to see people in person and physically hand them invitations, or mail them, but the point is there was a physical invitation. It's when Pinocchio sees his friend Candlewick that trouble starts creeping over the horizon. Candlewick says he can't go to the party because he's waiting on his ride to Toyland, a place where no one has to work and you can have fun all day doing whatever you want. Sounds too good to be true because it is. He invites Pinocchio to come along with him, and at first Pinocchio is like, nah, I spent the past year working my butt off in school, I'm gonna be a real boy. But Candlewick is really convincing, and how much discipline can you really expect a puppet to have when he's being sold the dream life? He ends up joining Candlewick on the wagon to Toyland despite there being plenty of signs that he shouldn't. For example, the donkeys that were pulling the wagon were all wearing shoes, similar to the ones that Pinocchio was wearing. Not to mention, one of the donkeys literally said, "Don't come with us, it's a really bad idea. Look at me, I'm a talking donkey with shoes on. Do you think that's a little off?" Pinocchio and Candlewick spend 5 months in Toyland living the dream life they always wanted, but one morning Pinocchio wakes up to discover he's grown a set of donkey ears, and so has Candlewick. Just like in the movie, the two learn the hard way that boys who don't study and try to grow up eventually turn into donkeys. And by the end of that day, their transformations were complete and Pinocchio was sold to a circus. Initially, he was expected to be a trick-performing donkey, but after being trained and abused for 3 months, he sprained his ankle and was sold once again, this time to a man who planned on killing him and using his hide to make a drum. Apparently, the man wasn't totally heartless because he felt bad looking into the donkey's eyes as he killed him. So get this. He ties Pinocchio's legs together and then ties a rope around his neck and throws him into the ocean. Once again though, Pinocchio's fairy was looking out for him and she sent a school of 1,000 fish to eat the donkey parts off of him. So when the man fished him out, he was expecting a dead donkey but got a living puppet instead. He's pretty angry about the fact that he wasted money on a pretend donkey, but Pinocchio jumps back into the ocean before he can be turned into firewood. He swims as far away from land as he can, only to come across the terrible dogfish, the book's version of the whale monstro. He tries swimming back to land, but the dogfish catches up to him and eats him right up. Pinocchio decides to explore the belly of the beast, and who does he run into but Geppetto? The old man's been living in the dogfish's stomach for 2 full years, surviving off supplies from a larger ship the monster also swallowed. Unlike the movie where Pinocchio and Geppetto start a fire to make Monstro sneeze, they simply climb out of his stomach and ride to land on the back of a tuna. That sounds like a lot of fun, right? I wish I had a better relationship with the tuna community so I could give it a try. But the story isn't over yet. This is when Pinocchio really takes on the full responsibility of not just being a real boy, but a real adult. When looking for shelter, they actually run into the fox and cat from earlier in the story, only now they look more like the residents of Catchfools. The cat's really gone blind after pretending to be for who knows how long, and the fox is hairless, has no tail, and lost function in one of his legs. They beg Pinocchio for help, but he tells them they got what they deserve and bids the false friends goodbye. He and his father stumble upon a cottage where they're welcomed inside, only to find the ghost of the talking cricket. He's still pretty bitter about Pinocchio killing him when they first met, but he lets them both move into his house because really, what's a cricket need a full house for? Right away, Pinocchio gets himself a job working for a farmer, the same farmer actually who bought Candlewick after he turned into a donkey. Unfortunately, Candlewick doesn't have a happy ending, and Pinocchio watches him die from being worked too hard and not given enough water. Even still, he works for the farmer in exchange for a glass of milk that he gives Geppetto every day. The old man's still recovering after living in the dogfish for so long. While all this is happening, Pinocchio really kicks it into high gear. He starts making baskets out of reads and selling them and uses the money to buy food, water, and books, which he uses to teach himself to read and write. After months of saving, Pinocchio has enough money to buy himself a new suit, but on his way into town, he runs into a talking snail that he met on the island of Busy. The snail tells him that the fairy is dying and can't afford food or medicine, so without a second thought, Pinocchio hands over the 40 pennies he was going to use to buy his suit and returns home. That night, Pinocchio has a dream where the fairy visits him and gives him a kiss, and when he wakes up, he learns he's finally become a real boy. And to top it off, not only did the fairy give him a new suit and shoes, but also 40 gold coins in place of his 40 pennies. The story ends with Pinocchio and his father embracing and staring at his puppet body now sitting to the side. Pinocchio says happily how ridiculous I was as a marionette and how happy I am now that I've become a real boy. And with that comes the end of the story. I hope you guys enjoyed this uncut version. The Pinocchio origin episodes are some of my favorites that I've done so far, but it's always kind of bothered me that there wasn't a complete version for the people who just want to sit back and listen to it all unfold at once. So I thought this would be a fun project to edit together while I'm out of town this week and can't work on my usual stuff. If you like this episode, make sure to smash that like button with all your heart so we can reach our goal of 5,000 likes and get you some extra content next week. That was an old clip that started us off, but I'm gonna stick to that promise anyway. There'll be at least one new messed up origin episode next week when I get back from vacation if you reach that 5,000 like goal by this weekend. As always, the best way to stay updated on Disney news and what kind of content I'm working on next is to follow me on social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All those links can be found in the description down below. I'll see you next week, Solo Cups. Until then, my name is John Solo, and remember, John shot first.